So there is no waste in nature. This is why it's so important, because it is used some way. And there is a second reason why there is no waste in nature. It was human who invented the term waste, not nature.
Yeah, I can see that when you look at environment, it's an ecosystem. In an ecosystem, there's a cyclical nature.
Yes.
So, one animal passing away turns into the food for the tree, for the insects. The insects turn into food for the animal, and you have this cycle. Whereas the term waste is where it's outside of that cycle. So waste would basically say something that exists outside of the cycle of the ecosystem of humanity. And we are back on the Money, the Mindset, and Mentoring podcast. We are super excited today to have Michael Rada of the Industry 5.0 movement. And I'm going to tell you, my conversation with Michael was, he's actually the founder of Industry 5.0. And our conversation the last time was really interesting because, there's a huge conversation around green energy, green tech. In Canada, we've got these carbon tax credits and all these things on the go, talking about how do we actually, be environmentally friendly. And my preliminary conversation with Michael was so powerful. I was like, I got to get you on right away. And so, Michael, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, my background, obviously, as some people may know and some people don't, is I was in the geothermal space, in the early 2000s, and I'm really passionate about finding ways that we can move forward in a way that we are less impactful to the environment. But I think there's a lot of misconceptions on that. So, Michael, I know you've got a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experience in this space. Let's just start off by just introducing yourself, and then we can dive right into some topics.
Thank you for the opportunity. My introduction is rather short because I started my career as a steel factory worker earlier than you, so in 1990. I ended as an employee on the board of second largest Japanese corporation. And I spent most of my life in logistics and with logistics, specializing in global supply chain efficiency and innovations and similar. And when I started my career as a late entrepreneur with 42, I decided to build Wasteless World. And this is what I do for the last 11 years. And I'm happy that it works really, having network in 180 countries and really growing it global in such a way which I never expected that it was.
Now, when we talk about the wasteless world, let's really start to define that, because there's a lot of people throw words around, and I think the green space is one of those spaces that it's notorious for words that are used that actually have no meaning. So let's talk a little bit about a wasteless world, and what's your definition of that?
Okay, so generally, if I ask someone what is wasteless world, there are all the time at least three images in front of your eyes. The first one is clean water in which you can drink, you can swim with no harm. The second is a clean air which you can enjoy without a face mask on. And the third one are the smiling faces of people which you love around you. Whether there is a new car, new house, a lot of money, it's another question, but these three are all the time there. And in my work, I rarely use the words green, sustainable. I don't use these words. I use only words which are real and which you can touch. This is why generally the power of touch is one of the most powerful tools which we use, for example, in Industry 5.0.
So let's talk a little bit about it, because I love that process. So when we look at the idea that sustainable, green, because those are pretty bastardized words, and now you're saying Industry 5.0. So describe to somebody what that means, Industry 5.0.
So generally, it's a long definition, but we make it short. Industry 5.0 restores the broken connection between nature and human-made ecosystem. And this is something which nobody did before, because it is evolution. Industry 5.0 is not the fifth industrial revolution. If somebody says that, he or she does not understand what they are speaking about. It is evolution. And the reason, because there is only one role model for my work. And this is nature.
Hmm.
And it is simple. Nature does not waste.
So when you look at when you say industry evolution, what you're doing is you're sort of mirroring the process of humanity as it's evolved, rather than saying industry revolution, which almost has that sort of antithesis to nature kind of a thing. Like when we think of the industrial revolution, we think of smog, we think of, a lot of damaging
Yes.
impact. So the idea is the industrial evolution versus the industrial revolution is you're thinking, how do we parallel that with nature so we can make it to give us that clean water, to give us that clean air, and to make those smiling faces around us so full of joy.
And generally, if you look, I will share with you an interview with Carl Gustav Jung, so one of the famous psychologists, and he recorded it in a form which we will call today podcast. It's 1 hour made by BBC, 1959. Unbelievable is on YouTube, and he finished this 1 hour with one sentence: "The man cannot live meaningless life."
Mm.
And creating wasteless world, it's a meaningful action. Because I decided that I do not want to live on the bottom of a black hole or on a global landfill. And to do so, you must prevent waste happen. And just to say, speaking about waste, it's not just a physical one. It's physical, social, urban process and wasting of time. So we have
say that one more time.
So physical waste, this is the trash. Then there is a social waste, which are people which are too young, too old, they can be ill. There's a lot of things why not to employ anyone, and even animals. So I don't think that animals should be kept just to be killed and eaten. I eat meat, but very rare. The third one is urban waste, which means empty factories, buildings, malls, and many others. The fourth one is process waste. There is a lot of connection with Lean, Six Sigma, these operational issues, which we know from the business. And the fifth one, it's a very special one, is wasting of time. And time is something which is really special because this is the most valuable asset we get in our life at the moment when we are born. But what is interesting is one of the mostly wasted one because we get it for free.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, when you look at the idea of industrial industry 5.0, and you've not once mentioned anything about carbon tax. You've not mentioned anything about going electricity versus gas. You haven't mentioned anything around that. Yet what you're saying is you started off with the whole process about a wasteless world, and I think you hit a lot of topics that I think people don't necessarily put into the traditionally what we'll call, I know you don't like the word, but we're going to use it, in the green space, right? I mean, you do have a podcast called the Green Living Chat, so we're gonna throw that out there. And and let's go through those five again. So I really want to make sure that we can hit it. So number one was which?
Physical waste. This is the trash and garbage which we generate.
Yeah. So when we hit on that one, when we hit on the physical waste side, and we just want to kind of dive, because I want to dive into each of them
okay.
a little bit deeper. So when we hit the physical waste side, what do you see as one of the best movements from an evolution standpoint in Industry 5.0 to deal with that topic?
It is to understand the fact that waste must not be created. And this is something very different. If you say this to someone, wasteless world, they will say to you probably, you must generate waste, but it's not true. I will show very simple example of a single-use plastic bottle. Other people who just listen will understand. So single-use plastic bottle. The question is not whether I will crash it after. The question is why not to refill it again? And this is the different approach. Because if you crash it, you have to put the material, it will become waste, then you can recycle. And generally, recycling is a big lie. I can explain later. But if you refill it, you generally cut by half its carbon footprint. If we speak about carbon footprint, I don't speak about it because I think it's the biggest crime in human history. So this is the difference. So it's the understanding that the change is not about money, it's the mindset.
Mm.
And I spent 8 years to write something which was never written in a human history. It's one page, which is called Waste Prevention Framework. And it was never needed in a human history.
Mm-hmm.
But right now it is needed, and it was published on September 1st, 2021. It's in 60 languages, and you can put it on a wall, generally here behind me. You can put it on a wall in a bank, in a school, in a mine, and everywhere it will work. This is why it takes me 8 years to write. In the meantime, I published over 3,000 articles. So it's really something very special.
Yeah, and I think the idea, when you look at the process of, instead of focusing on, we now have a problem, and then what are we going to do? What you're saying is we're going to address it before we have the problem.
Yes.
I have a physio that I work with who they do something called prehab, which I think is really, really interesting. And it's a very different way of looking at being in that space. Is instead of doing rehab, which is now the injuries occurred, what we're going to do is spend a lot of time on prehab, which is we're going to give you the movement and cycles to do the work to reduce the chances of the industry, so you don't waste that number 5 on your list, which was time. And so what you're saying is in the physical waste element, you're saying we're going to go and we're going to, number one, maybe reduce the amount of times we use single-use stuff. And number two, if it's a single-use stuff, then we're gonna go to the reuse, and so that we don't have to go to the last one, which is recycle, because that's what
Exactly.
most industry focuses on. Is we have garbage, how do we recycle it? Well, let's hit the first two before we get to that last one.
Before everybody follows so-called 3R: reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yeah.
But if you test it, it does not work. If you will try, it does not work. So I realized that, and I realized that we have tried to build the future on the top of a pyramid, not understanding that the pyramid has not been built for the living ones to live inside, but to store corpses.
Yep.
So when I realized that back in 2010, I decided to build another groundstone, and it's cube. And it's not 3, but it's 6R. And this is the methodology which we use. The first one is to recognize. And that's really hard. Recognize that something must not become waste. If you waste it before, it's really, really hard. But the second one, it's harder. Reconsider what to do with the item which you just saved. And trust me, you will fail for the first, second, third time, fifth time. But then when you succeed, you reach the third step. And this is to realize. You just simply do it. And when you succeed, you will change the world. And what is great about this methodology is that every single time you apply it again, you do it faster and faster. Your mind set up different way. So I need, in the first project 11 years ago, I need 3 months to run one project, to recognize, to reconsider. Today, I need 3 seconds. I don't need more. You say something and my brain immediately turns the image into the way how I will change it to be preventing. And I really love the pre-rehab. If you can connect us, it will be very interesting to talk about it, because this is the second category of waste. This is the social waste. It's closely connected.
Yeah, I'll definitely connect the two of you guys, because it's a really interesting work that they do. I love that you're saying that we're going to recognize, and then we're going to realize the next way of doing things, and being very thoughtful about that process, I think is really, really interesting. Now, we've talked about the first element, which was the physical waste. The second element is the second element?
Social waste.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that one, because that actually falls right into our conversation.
First time when I stay on the stage and say social waste, I don't feel good at all, because called humans waste, it's not right. But then I realized that this discomfort feeling helps us to really make the change. And I don't know how it is in Canada. In the Czech Republic, we have learned that we are living in our life in reproductive stage, which are the young people, then the productive one, and then the post-productive, which are the seniors. Mm. Which means the pre-productive and post-productive are for society waste, because we need to feed them, and we have only this productive time, but that's not right. Today, young children are able to make an app, make more money than the parents. The seniors, I am already 53. Since when I was 45, nobody will employ me. I was too old and I was overqualified. They call it so. So what I shall do? Should I become a burden for the society? No, I decided to change the rules completely. And this is why the social waste are not just ill people, but if you go to Pakistan, girls cannot educate themselves. It's social waste. Older people, ill people. But for me, everybody has its value, including animals, as I said before. So this is social waste, and we prevent it exactly the same way like the others. That's interesting that you apply all the same methodology and it works.
And social weight is actually a really interesting topic. I mean, in the condition of where I live in Canada, I mean, we see that. Unfortunately, I think it's a very growing situation. And I did a podcast a little while ago with a guy who talked about he called it technical debt. Like when people program a system, they're just like this inherent system flaws that the next generation of programs just inherent, and it's called technical debt. And really what you're talking about is just a buildup of really social debt, in the sense that, we've got, I like how you called them pre-producers and post-producers. And certainly there's concerns with both of those, but also the middle ground where somebody is now maybe run into a physical ailment or run into a mental ailment and something. Now they're sitting in that debt, that social debt category, and because they're not actually producing. And with a small pivot or a little bit of focus and a little bit of ingenuity to take them and put them back into process, number one, society is going to benefit, but I think inherently the individual is going to benefit, because, one of the things that I listened to a guy by the name of Grant Cardone, big follower of his, and, he was interviewed and by a guy by the name of Graham Stephan, and I think it was with Graham, and he said, do you want your daughter to be happy? And Grant's answer was no. I want my daughter to be productive. And I thought that was a great answer, because I look at productivity is something that I think ties people to the future. And by tying to the future, I think that gives them hope, and it builds that out so that they then can realize fulfillment, which is a greater degree of success than happiness.
There was just recently a discussion here whether we should hand over our work to artificial intelligence and all the other tools. And so we will live with our work. That's wrong, because work is part of the meaningful life. If there is no work, you can sit on a seniors generally. So if they go into rent, everybody is looking forward this moment. But then if they have nothing to do, they become older 1 year for 10 years. But if they have something to do, my granddad, which is here, the image behind me, he was 99 when he passed away 2 years ago. Until the very old last days, he was able to talk with me, such a discussion for 4 hours. He was a teacher all his life, So there is no waste. We just create it. And if I look at the latest Apple goggles introduced last week, I think, everybody you hear that these goggles are for the user. No. In fact, the user become the tool of the technology and collect the data. So the digital twin is easier to produce. But when I speak to someone in the digital sphere, in a virtual world, I ask them only one question, only one. How does the digital bread taste? And for 10 years, I received not a single answer, not a single.
That's a great question. That brings it right back to the Matrix, where the, I don't, and it's one of those questions.
I remember the number one very well.
That's right. And that's where he says, I know this steak is fake. I know this dig is not real. It's a digital manifestation, and I'm paraphrasing. But man, does it taste great? And it's the idea of the blue pill versus the red pill. When we look at AI in specific, AI is one of those things that I think I heard this from a quote where they said AI is like fire. It makes a really good servant, but a terrible master. And I think that's something that we have to consider as we play. I love playing in the AI space, and I like using it as a tool, as an accelerant on an already burning fire. And I think that that's something that we need to recognize, that if we are going to be using it, when do we, as you talk about, when do we become the product, the consumer of it, or when were we the producer of it? And if we're the consumer of it, we're being used in the process. We're being consumed.
I'm sitting right now and speaking to you 75 kilometers away from a place where the word term robot was introduced. 1921. Karel Čapek is the author. And already in his first novel, which is called RUR, he is delivering warning from humans become the servants of technology. Because when we get addicted to technology, no matter how we call it, AI, robots, cobots, whatever, it doesn't matter. We are addicted. The technology does not need us. We will need the technology more and more. And this is the scariest part. If you look at the videos of the people attesting, and they are clever people, and many of those, how fast they get adopted and get used to this strange goggle on their head because it's deliver all the answer. Is in the past, you have to go to church. If you have a question, the God will answer it. Today, 30 years ago came internet. It's everywhere, will answer every question. So it's like God. And today we have the AI, which is very different because very few people know that for example, the language modules, they are very limited in the source of information. So if you would like to deliver wrong information, you can check Wikipedia, check writer Michael Rada, no find. Writer Industry 5.0, it's 9 years old, nothing. Try to make an article about, will be deleted immediately. There is full ban of information about Industry 5.0, full ban, because the giants, how I call the big players, they don't have interest to live in a wasteless world, because if there is a shortage and waste in the world, shortage means bigger profit. If there will be no water in Canada, you will be willing to pay 100 Canadian dollars for 1 liter because it will be about survival.
Yep.
And that's the bad part about the society. This is why I go from the core and change the global picture. Industry 5.0 is just for me the way how to use, because it's understood. It's just one interesting thing. When I enter a company, or a company asks me whether I can implement Industry 5.0, I ask the CEO only one question for 10 years, only one question. Do you want to generate waste or profit? You cannot do both.
Mm-hmm.
And
now, when we talk about the waste, and that's, I want to park that because I want to wrap around that to the very end. I think that's a really good point to hit on, but I don't want to lose our focus where we were talking about the 5. We talked about physical waste. We talked about social waste. Let's talk about the third one.
Urban waste. So generally, a lot of empty factories, companies, fields which are used to build new distribution centers, where before corn was planted or anything else, you just have there a metal building which store something which will be not used in few years. And this is all are the brownfields, and these are all urban waste. In the US, just recently the crisis, and the same will happen in China soon, where the people do not have money to pay for the house, so they are moved out and they live in front of the house, and the house remain empty. It's completely wrong. That's the wrong setup. And this is generally the urban waste, which can be again prevented. When I look at the warehouses, I'm a logistician, so I'm frequently in the factories optimizing. I will say 80% to 90% of warehouses use just 40% of the real space. because of the height of the shelving and many different things, but all can be improved. But they don't see it. It's a professional blindness. So this is urban waste.
I love the idea of the word that you just used, professional blindness. That's actually a really interesting term not to overlook lightly. And I think sometimes in certain industries, we're trained to think in specific ways, and our training actually is what's inhibiting us from our growth. And when you look at urban landscape and the way that we conceive an urban landscape, whether it's from residential or whether it's from commercial, I don't think it's really been repurposed in a very long time in the way that we conceive what a space would look like. And I think I want to bring on a couple urban designers just to have some more conversation around this topic. Because I think it's interesting. And when I talk about urban designers, I'm not talking about people who take the, not McDonald's, but the McDonald's stamp and, it used over here, so we can use it 1,000 times, but something to rethink the idea of what an urban landscape should look like.
Everybody of us using bridges. But have you ever considered that we use only the upper part? But the people who can hide below, it is a roof. But it was never considered a roof. Why? So, and there are many others. What is interesting, for example, in UK, if you would like to build a new house or repair the old one, repairing is more costly from the duty point of view. It's additionally, you do not have such a big, so I was surprised about this. But many countries start to use really build buildings which can be repurposed, which can be easily managed. But it's the last few years. Before, nothing like that. I like, for example, the tiny houses movement, great movement. Or the container houses. A lot of things are already existing, but because of legislation or some other topics, you cannot apply them so easily.
Now, when we look at that, it's actually interesting to kind of think about how the three kind of connect. When we look at, first of all, urban waste, and then we look at social waste, and then we look at physical waste. When you have urban waste and you say, for example, it's lower cost to just demolish the house and rebuild, that's going to fuel, number one. Number two, it's going to create a disruption in the space and a really mispurposing of people who could be developing something more interesting. And because they're busy, but they're busy doing busy work. They're not busy doing productive work, which I think is definitely a waste in process. But that's something where I think when you look at the repurposing on the urban side, that needs to be considered.
Steve, do you know what are the three most profitable industries in the world?
Banking?
No.
Enlighten me.
First is war industry. No public numbers, but it is the most profitable industry in the world. The second is still crude oil industry. Very few numbers officially, but it is. But the third one is the waste industry. War is the biggest waste of all. And war creates waste, and waste creates war. You see, the crude oil in between and the waste industry reached from number 5 to number 3 in just one decade. 10 years ago, it was number 5, and before was drugs and slavery. And they overjump both in 1 year. So this is exactly matching what you said before.
Now, when you define the waste industry, again, when I look at the 5 pillars that you're putting together, I could 100% agree that it would be number 1. Because if you look at social waste, when you look at, a lot of the people who are jumping on systemic problems, when you look at physical waste, certainly that's a big issue. And when you look at urban waste, in Canada, we're probably seeing not a lot of that. I mean, we do see some, but I think we see urban misuse, which I would think that would fall into waste. I mean, the idea that everybody gets a 10 by 10 backyard and we're going to build all these buildings so that you can go into a building that you never see the backyard because the windows are always closed because that, the housing is so tightly together. It's a mispurpose of space. So I could call that in misuse. So I could definitely see by opening up the channel of what you define as waste, that it would definitely be number one. Now, we talked about those. What's number four? And
number 4 is the process waste. And this is because you are in industry and business, Lean and Six Sigma and all these names, Kaizen. This is the process waste. So we do things much more complicated than we should do. For example, very few people know in the world that 55% of shipping containers which ship the cargo all around the globe are shipped empty. They carry just air inside. With a train, you are very close to this number as well, because usually the train is loaded one direction but is not loading on the way back. And there are many similar examples. Unfortunately, this Lean Six Sigma and these methodologies do not solve the global supply chains. They do not solve the global picture. They are aimed to locally act, and they act well. But what is not well is the connection. As I said, I worked for 5 years for Japanese corporation. All this stuff came from Japan generally, and I was really inside of those. And they are not able to make the next step and to really make it large. They are great in a small things, but they are not able to expand it. And that's the bad thing.
When you look at process waste, I've had a couple people who I talked to specifically on the idea of reducing process waste through creating vertical integration. And do you see vertical integration as a method for helping solve process waste?
It is, but I would like to add, it is needed to break the silos. And very few of the experts do understand. And I do not speak only about the silos between industries. They are there. But I speak about the silos on the levels. So worker and supervisor, and there is a manager, and there are silos as well. So we have put ourselves behind the bars. The bars are the silos, and we show that we are free, but we put more and more bars there. So if we break them down, the efficiency will increase unbelievable. We are taking many examples out of nature, and we take all the time the examples which we never look at the efficiency. We look at the strengths, but every ant is much stronger than us. Only we have 2 legs. Why? Every ape which can use 4 is faster than us. So almost every creature in the world is better than us, but we call ourselves the masters of the universe. Sorry, we are not. So it's just a dream. But we can come back to nature. And this is what Industry 5.0 is trying to do. So reconnect what was broken. And I'm happy that it works. So
yeah, it's interesting when you think about the idea that connecting with nature, and you speak in those words, and evolution and speaking in those words, and then bring that together with process. Because usually when people talk about process efficiency, the first thing they think about is, we're going to build some technology, we're going to build some systems that are, either using machines or whatever. And process efficiency does not necessarily have to come, from that perspective. It can come from many other perspectives to solve it, not just using technology.
Just imagine that you go outside and every single tree is the same. Every single piece of grass, every single leaf. It will be nightmare. The efficiency of nature is created because every single leaf is different. They are not too similar. They are similar, but they are not same. And because of that, if you just look at a tree where there are the apple tree, these apples never, ever will grow at exactly the same minute. The upper one goes first, then the lower one because of the shadow and so on. And this is to reduce the volume of waste. Because we can consume it if we take it from the bottom and then. And if something falls down, it's fine. It becomes soil. So there is no waste in nature. This is why it's so important, because it is used some way. And there is a second reason why there is no waste in nature. It was human who invented the term waste, not nature.
Yeah, I can see that when you look at environment, it's an ecosystem. In an ecosystem, there's a cyclical nature.
Yes,
So, one animal passing away turns into the food for the tree, for the insects. The insects turn into food for the animal, and you have this cycle. Whereas the term waste is where it's outside of that cycle. So waste would
yes.
basically say something that exists outside of the cycle of the ecosystem of humanity.
And if you take this, and if you take the concept of circular economy, in the
Mhm.
concept is waste integrated because
Mm,
it was generally fueled by waste industry. Because for
mm,
waste industry, waste is treasure, and it's written even on the trucks. Waste is treasure, but never is written there for whom. Not for you, not for me, only for the waste industry. And this is
mm,
why even I said that recycling is a lie. It's a great process. I have nothing against, but in the wrong hands. Because if I put recycling in the hands of waste industry, will they ever try to prevent waste happen? No, because they will get rid of their easy profit and very growing profit size. And if recycling will work, then when the China stop importing plastic, and it was announced in 2017 by the Chinese president in February, until the end of the year, not a single waste company told to the client there will be a problem. But of course, because they did not, I have a great experience. I have a keynote speech in front of 1,000 people. And I asked them during the speech about Industry 5.0, who of you recycle? 1,000 hands goes up. And my second sentence was, you are lying. Everybody becomes silent. And they look at me with a question mark in their eyes. And I said, you do not recycle. You sort, but sorting is not recycling. And it was the moment when 1,000 people turn understanding what is Industry 5.0. Then the
mm.
difference. But for my government in Czech Republic, they says Czech Republic recycle 92%. The reality is 12. There is 80% difference in official statement because the government is thinking that sorting is recycling, but it's not.
Well, when you look at the idea of the urban waste and you say, we're going to just take this house down, nobody takes the house down and then starts putting it in different buckets. A big bin shows up and everything goes into that one big bin, which then goes to the dump.
I have to correct you. There is already, or there are already several projects. One of them was started in Germany a few years ago. And before a house should be demolished, the people go there, they pick up what can be reused, windows, doors, whatever. And it's really, they take it out and they resell it. It's great. And right now in Ukraine, there is starting a project doing similar. Unfortunately, there is quite difficult because of the bombs and everything. So you have to have a lot of army equipment to check it out because otherwise it can kill
Mm.
you. But we are trying to push this as well. So it is starting very slow. And the reason is because there is no legislation. Generally, the legislatives try to do against that because they are closely connected. Many governments are led by the waste industry because they have the money to pay them. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, as we kind of roll to the end of the podcast, one of the things that I think is great for us to talk about is the last one, which is time. And we talk about time waste. And certainly, I can tell you this podcast has been an absolute joy and an absolute treat. So there's no time wasted in having this chat, and I could talk with you for hours. But I want to get into this last topic and really dive into that one.
Wasting of time is omnipresent because we have learned that generally we are told that we should not waste our time, but we are usually wasting other people's time. So you know how many meetings did you have with someone who does not show up or came 15 minutes later or whatever. And this is exactly the lack of understanding that waste is the most precious gift we give, really, we get at the moment of our birth. And we will hand it over at the moment when we have to leave. But one question to the end. You know, we get one more gift at the moment when we are born, and then we will hand it over at the moment when we leave. Nobody can take it from us. And the confusing part, you can touch it with your hand. Do you know what it is?
No.
Shadow. Your shadow. Nobody can separate it from you. Even if you are in a dark room, the shadow is there. Did you know, for example, that a flame does not have a shadow? Just take the safety match. You can see it, but it does not have shadow. The flame does not have shadow. I didn't know about it. So it's quite interesting. And same, so we work a lot with questions in Industry 5.0. I value more question than an answer. And I have one more for you for the end. I think there is only one thing which in every language in the world sounds exactly the same. Only one thing. Do you know what it is? But you are using it. You are using it. Right now you are using it.
A laugh?
Silence. And if there will be no silence, we cannot talk together because we will say, and then we will be out of breath. So the silence is very important, but nobody take care. You can enjoy it if you go to forest or so, but generally there is no education about silence. There is nothing like that. And it is the second part which we get, that the silence is in every single language sounds the same. So, and these are the crazy things which came through me and with Industry 5.0 every day. And it makes me happy that we can share it with people and really.
Well, I think you've taken the idea of having a conversation around waste into so many different impactful areas that I think having a more holistic understanding of what true waste means by understanding Industry 5.0, I think that gives a lot of insight for people to do exactly what you just said, is start asking questions and really dive in and embrace. And this is, I think, is something that is systemic that needs to be solved, is the idea of asking more questions and getting more what I call fearless feedback, which is the idea that you're going to get something that's true coming back, whether you like it or not.
And that's the point. We are being asked to answer questions in a school, but nobody teaches us to ask the question. And I have a time when in Japan, they call me Mr. Question because I ask every time, and I spend all the time, long time to define the question, not to ask 5 times why. I hate 5 times why, which is a methodology coming from Japan generally. And I really hate it because it's a psychological tool and it makes me depressed. So I spend my time to ask the right question every time.
So the idea of that one is, don't hone in on your answer, hone in on your question, and you're going to get a better answer.
Exactly. Yeah. And don't worry to ask. In my country, the students and even the adult people, we do not ask. If you ask at the end of a keynote, you ask the audience, do you have a question? Everybody is looking whether they have the clean shoes. And it was a time when the organizers of events invited me because I was the only one who was asking. And 2 years later, they stopped to invite me because I asked questions. Which, of course, the sponsors do not like. Because
I do have one question to ask you.
Okay.
And that question is, if somebody wants to reach you, other than looking up the Green Living Chats podcast or finding you at your website of the Eco Amet Solutions, what's the best way for them to find you?
Input my name in Google search. Siri, who is Industry 5.0 founder? Or the really best way is go to LinkedIn, send me the invitation, and we get connected. There are, I think, 52 Michael Radas, but the only one is in Czech Republic, so you will not miss me, probably.
Well, we got to make sure that you stay the only Michael Rada, because this has been an absolute treat to have a chat with you, and really enjoyed learning all about Industry 5.0 and really about how to think and rethink this topic. So I appreciate having you on the podcast, Michael.
It was a pleasure, and I think that it was not the last one. And I feel there will be much more, and I'm looking
I,
forward to it.
I agree with you. And
And
with that, guys, we are now finished with the podcast of with Michael Rada talking about Industry 5.0, and we definitely look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.
may I